The following is a presentation of the St. Louis Chess Club. 20 international chess professionals compete in St. Louis as USChessChamps.com presents the second annual Fall Chess Classic. You are looking live in the beautiful and historic Central West End in St. Louis, Missouri. Just a hop and a skip from Forest Park, the jewel of St. Louis. And what a location for this event. So come on down 2 floors below and welcome in to Studio B. Hello, chess fans. Ben Simon and International Master Eric Rosen here for the call, Day 5 of the Fall Classic.
Right, we're more than halfway through the event, and I think the players might be getting a little bit tired. I'm feeling the tiredness a little bit, but I'm ready for hopefully several more rounds of fighting chess.
Let's see where we stand right now in Group A, our Masters Division. Okay, so we have 2 players at the top, Alexei Dreyev and Alexander Lenderman. And the rest, it's a real big log jam right there, and you see Daro bringing up the rear, but still in this event, I would say it's anybody's chess tournament. And now here are the standings for Group B, the challengers, if you will. And typically in these events, we see one person from one of the fields begin to emerge around this time. And right now it is the Armenian champion from 2017, Hovhannes Gabuzyan. 3.5 points. He has a full 1-point cushion against his nearest rivals. And we'll see if he can capitalize even further today on this one. Let's glance at the tournament format in case you're joining us for the very first time. This is a round-robin affair. The time control is 90 minutes for the first 40 moves, and then there's 30 minutes added on for the remainder of the game. There is a 30-second increment from move number 1, and to encourage fighting chess, there are no agreed draws allowed before the 30th move of black. Okay, let's take a look at the schedule. Once again, we are at round number 5 of 9 every day. The games begin at USChessChamps.com at 1 p.m. Central Time. Our broadcast begins 2.5 hours after that at 3:30 Central Time. And please note that on Thursday, we are beginning universally early so we can have room for playoffs if necessary.
Also room for the final dinner, too. From what
Yes.
I heard, there's a closing dinner the night the tournament ends, so I'm sure the players will look forward to that.
Yes, that's the thing we're all looking forward to be quite honest. You never know what you're going to get, but it's really good. All right, and all along the way, we want you to join us on YouTube, if you're not there already, on Twitch, if you want to go there, on USChessChamps.com. Check out the Chess24 module all along the way. We have a nice little video player in the upper right, a nice chat room. It's a lot of fun. Analysis, you can turn it on or off. Check it out. That's the best way to follow these games all along the way. And all over social media, we invite you to use the hashtag FallChessClassic. We want to make it more active. Come on, guys. Join this conversation. We'll talk about it on the air, whatever you post, as long as it's appropriate. And YouTube chat room, I've got it up right now. I'm looking at your chats. I'm looking at your questions. We will be addressing those during this show. So keep it civil and keep it thoughtful. And now, without wasting any more time, here are the pairings right now in Group A. All of the games are still in progress. Daro versus Eric Hanson. Yuri Kuzubov versus Yoon Ludwig Hammer. Ray Robson versus Sethuraman. Alex Lenderman versus Lazaro Bruzon. And what is our key matchup today, Eric?
Yeah, we have Varuzhin Akobian against Alexei Dreyev, 2 heavy hitters in Group A. Pretty much they're both legends in some sense, given that they're part of the older pack of the group. And we had Akobian in the studio yesterday after a very solid draw. He seemed pretty calm and relaxed and collected. And I do want to take a glance at their current position because things are looking very symmetrical, a little bit boring. If we go back and just see the opening, Akobian played one of his trademark lines, the exchange Slav variation, which, if I'm not mistaken, Akobian taught a kids class about a couple weeks ago where he showed this line to a group of kids at the St. Louis Chess Club, and I'm wondering if perhaps Dreyev watched that video and maybe expected this line. The thing about this variation is that white has a very slight advantage because white gets the first move, and in symmetrical positions, usually white can fight for something, but it seemed like Dreyev was quite well prepared. And I like the idea that Dreyev employed in this position after bishop to e7. The idea was to play knight h5 to grab the bishop pair. This prompted Jacobian to play h3, giving some escape square for the bishop. But then after this move, bishop to d6, seems a bit weird that Dreyev moved his bishop 2 times in a row so early on in the game. But now white is forced to trade off this bishop and cannot play a move like bishop g3, given that the pawn is not supporting it from h2. And from this position, both sides just completed development. Nothing too exciting happened. Jacobian did have a slight pull because he did have a good bishop against a bad bishop, but very soon trades started happening around move 18. Knights came off the board, and then rooks came off the board, and then more rooks came off the board, and then eventually queens came off the board. And it seems like both players are just trying to get to move 30, and then I'm expecting to see just a draw in perhaps 3 more moves.
Is it precisely drawn, do you think? I mean, is there any chance for one player to break through, or do you see it as a draw?
I mean, if we had to put an evaluation on the current position, white is perhaps still a little bit better, but I doubt that Jacobian will be playing for much here. Black's position is just so solid. White still has a more active bishop, some slight space advantage on the king side, but there's no real targets to attack. I mean, black has everything under control, just a couple pawn islands, and black is just ready to perhaps centralize a king, and then probably just wait. And I don't see how Jacobian can make any progress without weakening himself. Now, this is a type of position, maybe if you turn on the engine, it will say maybe plus 0.2, plus 0.3, given that the engine will like white's better bishop and white's more space on the king side, but I don't think it's anything to play for.
All right, well, we expect a draw coming up here in our key matchup in Group A, but let's glance over at Group B and what's going on in our Challengers division. We have Steven Zherebukh versus Sergei Azerod, Ashwin Jayram versus Chris Yu, El-Shawn Diabati versus Akshat Chandra, Danish Boros taking on Brandon Jacobson, and our key matchup.
That's right, we have Conrad Holt against Hovhannes Gabouzian, who has really been impressing us this tournament. Gabouzian winning his first 3 out of 4 games, drawing 1 game, putting him in clear lead with 3.5 out of 4. I'm sure he's looking to continue the momentum, especially after yesterday. He received a very generous gift by Danish Boros after Dennis just blundered a pawn and Gabouzian took the game home for a full point. Let's take a look at their current situation. Gabouzian was playing very quickly out of the opening, and this is a position from just about 10 to 20 minutes ago where the pawn structure isn't as pretty as the game that we just saw between Jacobian and Dreyev. There's very much damaged pawn structure for both sides. White having double isolated pawns on the f-file, isolated pawn on h3 and on d4. Meanwhile, black also has a few isolated pawns on the queen side, double pawns on the king side. Now we should mention that white is up a pawn, but with so many pawn weaknesses, I think black has some nice compensation here. And I do like the move that Gabouzian played in this position, simply pawn to a5. Very nice pawn break. This is a very thematic move that you'll see in many different opening, middle game, or end game scenarios whenever white has this pawn structure with a3 and b4. It makes sense to try and break down the structure with a pawn break. In this case, the a pawn being supported by the rook, and the bishop applying pressure far away from f8. And it looks like this is an attempt to just break down white's queenside pawns. After bishop to d2, the pawns get traded, then the bishops get traded, and now every single pawn in this position is an isolated pawn for whites. However, it seemed like things continued to simplify after knight d5, Nice outpost square attacking b4, pressuring f4. White played king to g3. Black wins the b4 pawn. Rook c4. Knight jumps into d3. And then, okay, some dancing around a little bit. Let's get to the current position where after rook takes e6, white is still up a pawn, but it seems very difficult for white to make any progress, still given that white's pawns are just pretty weak. And I mean, there is a passed pawn on h3, but it seems like black has everything under control here. And I do like this pawn chain by black, even though there are double f pawns. Black's pawns support one another, and it seems like this position should be a draw relatively soon. Now, I am impressed with Gabusian's time management, given that he has 90 minutes on the clock. They just reached move 40, so there's probably not going to be any time trouble in this game.
I mean, if one player was to win, they'd have to attack. Well, I guess if white were to win this, they'd have to attack the f7 pawn, right, and get that off the board. But if you defend it, it's fine, right?
Yeah, I think black is just gonna probably bring the king to f6 and then probably just wait. Maybe poke and prod at white, given that the rook can perhaps swing around and activate itself from far away, maybe a4 or a3 to tickle some of these white pawns. But it seems like there's not much to play for either side. So it's possible we'll see a few quick draws relatively early in the round.
Okay, so now that we have glanced at our key matchups, let's take a look at what is on the line for these players in this event. First, in Group A, there is a $22,000 prize fund where the champion will win $6,000 of that pot. And now, Group B, $14,000 prize fund, and the champion walks away with $4,000. One of the games, well, did you have a game in mind before I suggest one, Eric?
I do, actually.
Okay, what do you have?
I would like to hop to the game between the youngest player in the field, Christopher Yu, playing Ashwin Jayram, who has been recovering from an earlier loss in the tournament and is now maybe building up some momentum after his nice win yesterday against Akshat Chandra. Looks like they have a very hard-fought battle, given that, it seems like chaos in the position. Black is very overextended with these pawns on e4 and d4, but both are pretty well supported, the e-pawn being supported by the queen and the bishop, and f-pawn being supported by the knight and the rook. And I would feel a bit uncomfortable as white, given that these pawns are so far pushed in the position. Now, many more moves have been played from this position. Christopher did take on d4, and then played queen to g6. Looks like black is just going for a very strong kingside attack, given that g2 is a very juicy target in the position. We can imagine that black is having ideas of maybe f3, or maybe even e3 to unleash the bishop from b7. So I really like this move, queen to g6. This prompted Ashwin to play bishop to d5, perhaps trying to neutralize this bishop on b7. And after bishops get traded, black brings this knight to f6. Seems like black is just bringing more and more pieces to the king side. We see most of the black pieces on the king side. I like the coordination of the knights. They do defend each other, and this knight on f6 attacks the queen, defends the pawn on e4. After queen to c6, rook g8, threatening mate on g2, and we should notice there's not too many ways for white to defend in this position. The queen is shut out on c6, given that this pawn is defended on e4 by the knight. So it seemed like there's only one reasonable move for white to play in this position to defend, that move being g3, which is a very ugly move, given that it looks quite weakening and it kind of interferes with this bishop on h4. But perhaps it keeps things under control. And okay, we have even more chaos after Christopher pushing even further with pawn to e3, and then Ashwin took on e3, and Christopher takes on g3. I like the sequence. Sometimes when you push pawns, it's with the intention to simply undermine your opponent's pawn structure, and that's what we're seeing here. White having kind of a mini pawn chain on f2 and g3, Christopher attacks the base of the pawn chain and then completely destabilizes this g3 pawn. And now it's a question what to do as white. Seems like black's attack is crashing through. I would be terrified if I were Ashwin. Maybe his opponent doesn't look like the most intimidating person to sit across from you, but if we look at the position, it just looks very terrifying.
And this is a rated event, so if you have a loss to Brandon Jacobson or Chris Yu, you're going to lose more points than you would to the other players. So you got to stay on your game. You're never playing the opponent, you're playing the position, right? That's what
very true.
One of the games that really is looking interesting, it's very crowded, a lot happening on the board. Group A, Daro Spirits versus Eric Hanson. Let's check that one out.
Yeah, this game actually caught my eye earlier. If we glance at the position, we can really admire White's very nice space advantage. I want to go back and look at the opening because Daro Spirits actually unleashed one of my favorite openings, the London opening, played after bishop to f4. And now Eric seemed to try and go for a King's Indian attack. And then Daro actually played a move here that I like to play, knight to c3. This is going into what we call the berry attack, where white is intending to play e4 right away. So if black were to play bishop g7, then white could play e4 and perhaps go into more Pirtz or modern territory, where white is very quickly controlling the center and very often going for moves like queen d2, castling queenside, and then perhaps going for some later attack on the king side. So we see, rather than playing bishop to g7, Hanson responded with pawn d5, preventing pawn e4. After pawn e3, bishop g7, white plays a very aggressive move here. This is a type of move you usually don't see as early on move 5. We see pawn h4. Now this is a very trademark move of the berry attack. And this is one of my favorite moves to play, favorite openings to play in blitz games and over the board tournament games, simply because white has a very direct idea of playing pawn h5. Now, just to demonstrate this, if we imagine black ignores this idea and castles in the position, white would be more than happy to play h5. And if knight take h5, rook take h5, pawn take h5, queen take h5, white has sacrificed a rook for a knight and pawn, so white is currently down material. But if you look at the position, you have to prefer white's. Very nice attack already on the king side, ideas of bishop d3, knight f3, and castling queen side. And I believe if you turn on the engine in this position, the engine will love white, giving an evaluation of somewhere around plus 1.5. So for that reason, Hanson did not allow the pawn to advance further to h5, rather played h5 himself, and then developed in somewhat quieter fashion after knight f3, bishop g4, queen d2. I do like this move, queen d2, because purpose is to get out of the pin, to prepare to castle queenside, and also to improve the knight with knight e5. And what this prompted black to do was taking on f3, which is actually not a move that black likes to play early on because it concedes the bishop pair, and it also opens up this file for white to potentially attack later on the king side. So going forward from here, I do want to zoom forward. You see both players complete development. Hanson playing the Ben Feingold move, always play king b1, safer place for the king, a6, and now e4. And now we begin to see the central expansion from white after e6. White is enjoying a pretty nice space advantage, also enjoying the bishop pair, both bishops having very clear purpose in the position. After knight e7, just seemed like a passive position for black for many of these moves. Knight h7, not the most aesthetic square for the knight, incredibly passive, perhaps kicking the bishop on g5. So white played bishop to h6. After queen d6, now we see e5. And white has a pawn structure which you don't usually see in the King's Indian. Does this remind you of any certain opening that might be related to the structure?
advanced French?
Yeah, it's just something that you would normally see in the advanced French. Now, normally in the advanced French, black is not supposed to fiend cattle this bishop on g7. In this case, the bishop is just staring at the tip of white's pawn chain. So I really like the way that Daro is playing this so far. After queen d8, knight e2, seems like white is just bringing all of the pieces over to the king side to help out in the attack. Bishop take h6, queen take h6. Now the threat is a simple queen take h5, utilizing the pin on the g file. So king h8 was played. Now the knight hops in to f4, and white is just having a number of just crushing tactical ideas. For starters, the simple knight take h5, because now this pawn is no longer pinned to the king, but it's pinned to the checkmating square on g7, given that if white could take on h5 and open the g file, there would be the potential for queen g7 mates. Not only that, but white is also threatening bishop take on e6 here, given that if pawn take back on e6, white could then recapture with the knight, threatening the queen, and threatening queen g7 checkmate. This is one of the most powerful forks in chess, when you can attack the queen and attack a mating threat. So Hanson played probably what is the only defensive move here, rook to g8. Seems like white continues to improve the position, bringing the knight to a very beautiful outpost square on c5. And now knight to g8, queen f4, queen e7, and now bishop f1. I just want to take a moment and kind of laugh at black's setup here. I don't usually see the chess bra playing like this, but this just reminds me of a turtle just kind of tucked away in its shell, just praying for dear life that it's not going to be attacked. And I guess so far the turtle strategy is working, where white doesn't have an immediate breakthrough. But I mean, black's position just looks so ugly. This rook has no moves. Knights have very difficult time activating. The only issue for white is the time situation, but I would much rather be white in this position.
I mean, you got to look where these two players are right now in the standings in this event. Neither one of them can be too happy about how they've performed so far. Daro is sitting with just 1 point out of 4, and Eric Hansen is at 1.5 points, I believe. So, poor Eric.
It's tough. I mean, if Daro can win the game, that will be a nice kind of confidence booster for him. I know it's not easy to have kind of a bad event where it seems like everything is going against you, but sometimes if you can have a nice win, if Daro can maximize his advantage and convert the position, maybe that will give him some momentum in the later end of the tournament.
In the meantime, we do have 2 results that have come in for Group A, one of which we did expect. Akobian and Andreev have drawn their game. There's no surprise there. Another draw from a game we did not look at, Alexander Lenderman versus Boros. That was a draw.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, that means that the 2 leaders, Andreev and Lenderman, have drawn their games. Maybe that gives some chances for some of the other players in Group A to catch up?
Yes, it does. Actually, so Boros, okay, so at the leaderboard we have live leaderboard. Lenderman and Andreev at the top with 3.5, and Akobian and Boros with 2.5. And then we have 3 players with 2 points, Sethuraman, Kuzapov, and Hammer.
So it seems like the leaders will stay put with
right.
3.5 points.
Yeah, there's opportunity there, no doubt. Kuzapov and Hammer looks interesting. Looks like a game we should check out in Group A.
I see a very closed position with all major pieces on the board, with the addition of the 2 dark squared bishops for each side. Let's go back just a few moves, see how the play has been developing. I mean, going back to right around this position, I do like white's setup. Whenever you're playing a game and there's only one open file in the position, one of the best strategies and one of the most simple strategies is to double your rooks on that file. And we can see that Kuzapov has done just that in this position, putting both rooks on the only open file, and black is now in a situation where the file can't really be contested, and white could improve even further here with a move like queen to c4, having a triple battery, also what's known as an Alechine's gun, just a very powerful weapon in the position. So I do like white's position around here. Let's see how play developed after e6. White gains more space on the queen side with pawn b5. Maybe what white is trying to do is play pawn a4 and then bishop a3, because this is the one downside for white in the current moment, this bishop not doing too much on b2, especially when all your pawns are on the same color as the bishop, usually not a good bishop. So I think white simply wants to reposition the pawns on light squares and then make the bishop a bit happier. So after pawn b5, black plays rook f7, queen to c4, achieving the triple battery. Now we see pawn a6, pawn to a4, a trade happened on b5, queen a6, and now queen b3. Seems like white's in full control. Black is very much restricted. Even though white has now only one rook on the c file, black can still not contest the file, and now white has a lot of pressure additionally on this half-open b file, given that the rook on b5 and the queen on b3 form a battery against the b7 pawn. Now, the b7 pawn is defended for the time being, but this is going to be a long-term headache for black to constantly kind of babysit the pawn on b7. Also, black has to babysit the pawn on e6, given that the queen is applying nice pressure in multiple directions. So I do like the way Kuzubov is demonstrating some nice kind of positional prowess, continually improving his position. I can imagine that very soon that we'll see some move like bishop to a3, simply to improve the bishop. And we might even see rook to b1, maybe shifting that triple battery from the c file to the b file, just to pile down on this weak pawn on b7.
And once that pawn goes, then that a pawn is a passer for white.
Yeah, that's certainly a long-term strategy to someday win the b pawn, make the a pawn pass, and then someday queen the a pawn.
All right, yeah, it looks very good for Kuzubov, who is still in the top portion of this event as far as contention goes.
I should also mention I am taking a look at the Twitch chat here, and we do have a comment from Zjar, perhaps spotting some simple tactics that I have been overlooking. White actually has a simple threat after queen b3 of playing rook b6, simply attacking the queen and threatening also the pawn on e6. So black does need to defend in this position, and I think black played the only move to defend with rook to d6, perhaps trying to not allow this move to take place. And for the time being, black is still holding on, but I mean, white is certainly the one for choice in this game.
Over in Group B, there is a rook that is going up, but I'm not sure if it's over in the game between Zherebukh and Azerod, and I'm not sure what the rook is doing, but this looks really interesting to me. Let's take a glance at it.
Yeah, the last move played rook to h5. I want to go back here. They had a variation of the Sicilian in which black played this early kind of pawn h5 to reinforce the knight on g4. And after bishop take g4, h take g4, at first glance it seems like this pawn is undefended on g4, given that queen take g4 does pick up the pawn. I think the problem with this would be that black could then seize the pawn on e4. And now the problem for white is that this knight is pinned on c3 to this checkmating square c2. So knight take e4 would just run into queen c2 mates. So an interesting decision by black to allow the pawn on g4 to just kind of stay put, being attacked by the queen. But the queen is kind of tied down here to covering both c2 and e4. So I do like the move that Zherebukh played, rook he1, putting more support on pawn on e4, perhaps giving the queen some more mobility. Now we see knight to c4. Seems like black really wants to focus on the queen side in this position, given that white's king is a long-term target. After bishop to d4, rook h7, kind of a strange move. Perhaps unpinning the g-pawn not entirely sure what the purpose of this is. Maybe wanting to play g6 and f5. But, okay, one more move has been played for each side. Queen d3, and then rook to h5.
I guess that was just to avoid the e5 surprise.
Yeah, queen d3 does align the queen with the rook. And I'm realizing here that black maybe doesn't want to play g6 because this could allow some explosive pawn break in the center, pawn f5 to potentially open up some files. So black does want to keep the center closed with the king still on e8. So rook h5, getting out of the way of the queen. In a dream scenario, black would maybe someday love to swing the rook all the way across to help out attack on the queen side. But yeah, for the time being, I do kind of like the creativity by Sergei Azerod in this position, given that he's left his king in the center, but his king is safe, and his rook is not only helping control the fifth rank, but maybe also discouraging white from executing any sort of break on the fifth rank. And we can imagine that black might want to continue very soon with some pawn advances like pawn b4, pawn a5, and just continue the pawn storm. So let me update the board. There's been one more move, pawn to a3, perhaps trying to discourage pawn b4. And this is the current position. I mean, pawn a3, it's a good sign for black that white isn't doing anything immediate. And now it's a question, how does black try and continue with some attacking ideas, given that b4 no longer seems playable. Maybe there's some possibility of playing a5. And perhaps this is the usefulness of the rook on h5, now that it supports the b pawn. And if a5 is played, there's ideas for black of playing b4 or a4. So if I had to choose one side, I would probably pick black, but both players are getting a bit low on time, and they still have 17 moves to make until time control.
All right, we'll have to keep an eye on this one for sure. Also in Group B, we have a game between El-Shawn Diabate and St. Louis and Akshat Chandra. There are passed pawns, one for each side in the middle of the board. Looks like the queens might come off here. What's going on here, Eric?
Yeah, it seems like a position which, okay, was probably more of a mess earlier. A lot of things have been traded. And if I'm just doing a basic material count, black is currently up the exchange. White does have 5 pawns on the board to 3 pawns. So white does have 2 pawns for being down the exchange. After queen to g7, perhaps Akshat is kind of begging for a queen trade, given that white is in great attacking shape, given the king is a bit unsafe on g8. And normally situations like this, where white is kind of posed with the question whether or not to trade queens, you have to ask yourself about king safety. And I think in this position we can see white's king is far more safe than black's king. So I like the decision that El-Shawn made here, playing queen to c6, avoiding the queen trade, keeping the tension. Also maybe preparing rook to d7, and this is a very common attacking idea in many endgame situations where you want your rook to come to the opponent's 7th rank. And if rook d7 could be played, then white will be having some fun. And I do like the positioning of this knight on e3, just simply blockading black's only passed pawn, defending a lot of key squares on the king's side, discouraging any pawn g4 break. So it seems like white has some nice harmony in this position.
Look at the time here. Akshat Chandra down to 30 seconds.
Yeah, I know Akshat is somewhat notorious for taking perhaps a little too much time earlier in the game. This happened yesterday to him against Ashwin Jayram, and the severe time deficit just led to a blunder. So he has to play quickly here. Queen f7 was played. I think this is a great situation for El-Shawn to be in. I mean, the opponent's so low on time. They have 7 more moves to make until time control. And it seems like white has the initiative. It's a question of how white can perhaps crash through with the attack. There are some lines I'm calculating here. I mean, the first move to look at is the most aggressive move, rook to d7. Now, this would allow black to play queen f2, which looks a bit scary, but after the simple king h1, I don't think black would be able to make much progress. If the knight were to be taken, then there's just a simple mate in 2 starting with queen g6, followed by queen g7 mate. So I'm sure El-Shawn is perhaps considering this very ambitious rook move into the heart of black's position. It's just a matter of concrete variations. And sometimes when you have the time advantage, you want to just use that time to calculate. You want to calculate all the forcing moves and not just play one move and then start thinking, but really dig deep. And perhaps if El-Shawn can calculate some forcing line, he can whip it out rather quickly and put Akshat in a situation where there's really no time to calculate. And for black, he just has to play on pure intuition.
El-Shawn Diabadi sitting right now at 2 points in Group B. I think there's a piece that is being offered up as a sacrifice over in Group A in the game between Ray, Robson, and Sethuraman. It looks like Ray had a knight on the rim, and he's offering it up to black's g-pawn. Is that what's happening here?
I'm just trying to digest what's going on in this position. At first, I thought Ray's clock said 1 hour and 29 minutes, but it says 1 minute and 29 seconds, which is not a lot of time to make 15 more moves. Let's go back here and see what is going on. I mean, black has some nice play on the A file. One thing that catches my eye, let's see, how did the rook come to A1? Wow, knight to B3. I actually want to go back to this position because it seems like this is where the fireworks just started to come after pawn to D4. Ray seemingly had a very nice position given that the knight is attacked and white is threatening this fork on D5. But this move, knight D3, highly creative, taking advantage of the fact that there is some pin along the A file. And the rook is now attacked by the knight. If the rook were to move, there would be rook take A2, and black would be crashing through. Very nice coordination with the rook, the knight, the bishop supporting the knight, the queen supporting the rook. So for this reason, Ray decided to take on B3, going down the exchange, but then having D5. So we're going to see some material imbalance now that it seems like Ray did win back a piece, and now we have a very classic material imbalance. 2 minor pieces for a rook and a pawn, actually, if I'm counting correctly. Normally situations like this, if it's a middle game scenario, 2 minor pieces are typically more valuable than rook and pawn. But black does have some annoying pressure along the A file after F3. Some repositioning. Pawn D5, very interesting move, trying to make use of this queen bishop battery, perhaps destabilize white's structure on the king side. Pawns did get traded on D5. Now bishop to C5, rook B8, a trade on A1, and now this is a moment that that you were mentioning before, knight F5. This just seems like a pure sacrifice. Not caring about the pawn, which could very easily capture. I'm wondering if Ray is playing this out of desperation, or if this is just a well-calculated, or maybe just intuitive attempt to really tear apart black's king side. We can imagine if the pawn takes on F5, white's queen can come in, and this king is feeling pretty naked on G8. If the queen were to take on C3, white is having some fun. Queen G5 check, followed by something like bishop E7. And this is a very big problem for black, given that white has the only dark squared bishop on the board. And cases like this, the dark squares are just very, very weak for black. I think bishop F6 is pretty much unstoppable. There would be some spite checks, maybe queen D4, but after king G2, maybe it's still a bit complicated, given black could perhaps check a few more times. But I would very much like white's chances in that variation. And I feel like knight f5 is a move that Sethuraman did not see coming. It's kind of a so-called invisible move. Usually, even strong players don't look at moves where players are putting their pieces where pawns can simply capture them. And if black doesn't capture the knight on f5, then the knight can very happily hop in to e7 or even h6. And the fact that black is committed to playing pawn g6 really weakens a lot of the dark squares around the king side. So even though Ray is pretty low on time, I do like his chances here. And given that Sethuraman has been taking a while on this move, I'm sure Ray is thinking on his opponent's time to calculate what's going to happen next.
Big news in Group B in the game between the Hungarian and the American. Danish Boros versus Brandon Jacobson. It looks like Boros is losing a queen, probably the game here, imminently. Let's take a look.
Oh, that's the wrong game. Let me go a bit further down. I don't think we've talked about this game yet, but no. I was taking a look at it earlier, and it seems like black's attack was quite menacing. Let's go back. It just seems like so much chaos every which direction. Yeah, actually before the broadcast started, I was looking at this position, trying to comprehend what was going on after black's pawn emerged on d5. Boros decided to capture the pawn on e5, which looks like a free pawn, though Jacobson had a very nice response here. Bishop take h3, discovered attack against the bishop on e5, also an attack against the rook on f1. And okay, after king take h3, white's king became very unsafe on the edge of the board. I want to go back and just illustrate one point, that if bishop take f6, black could take back simply with the queen. And even though this bishop is still undefended on h3, this bishop on f3 is also undefended. So white did probably not want to enter this line. So king take h3 was played, rook take e5, pawn d4. And I like the just an energetic play by black. Rather than retreating the rook, Jacobson starts with a counterattack. Queen d7 check, king h2, and then very surprising exchange sacrifice, rook take e4. Not the move that I would first consider, but I really like the nature of this move, because after bishop take e4, knight or pawn take e4.
Did they shake on it?
Did they shake?
See, yep, there we go.
Wow. Well, maybe we have to get Brandon in the studio to take us through this game.
I agree 100%. FIDE master, our now international master, Brandon Jacobson, who is looking to perform very well in this tournament. This is there's 8 grandmasters in this field.
I mean, he was second place going into this round, and with a win in this game, I think he's going to be perhaps on the verge of catching up to Gabuzian, or at least on pace for a GM norm.
Yes, he's undefeated.
Very impressive.
3 draws and a win. Well, now this makes it 2 victories.
Mm-hmm.
So good job, Brandon Jacobson. Yeah, we'll have him in here.
I'll probably hold off on going through the finale to the attack.
Right.
And viewers will have to stick around for his words on how the game finished. So any games to look at? Any more interesting positions or exciting
Yuri
evaluations?
Kuzubov and Hammer in Group A. Let's go back to that one.
Yeah, we were taking a look at this game earlier, and I was really admiring White's position. Seems like White has been making progress since we last saw it. Just going back after Rook d6 was played, defending against this threat of Rook b6. White enters Black's territory, Rook c8 check, King h7, and now very explosive move, pawn to d5. Earlier I was thinking the bishop could activate itself via a3, but pawn d5, very nice, just kind of pawn break to try and tear apart Black's position. Now there's a bit of chaos, because not only are the bishops staring at each other, but the pawns are staring at each other. And I could imagine a situation where if Black takes on d5, White can simply take back. And now f5 is a target, the rook on f7, is also a target. It's just an undefended piece. So if black were to take, white could just take back. Even though this bishop is undefended on b7, black has to, or on b2 rather, black has to deal with the immediate threat of queen take f7. So d5, nice move. This is a type of move that sometimes you want to look for when your position is really good, when your pieces are good. You want to look for the pawn breaks to open up the position and create these tactical scenarios that will hopefully work in your favor. Now, Hammer does have some time to fathom what to do here. Just under 12 minutes on the clock, Kuzubov having just over 5 minutes. Let me update the board. This looks to be the current position. So we'll have to keep an eye on this. You can see both players are very focused. Hammer not having the best event so far, even though he had a very beautiful game earlier in the event, but it seems like Kuzubov has been just a solid player so far this event.
Do you think that Hammer should capture on d5 right now?
I mean, what else to do? White wants to take on e6. So if a move like bishop take b2 is played, maybe the only other candidate move, white doesn't necessarily have to take back right away. White can play the in-between move, pawn take e6, with a simple counterattack against the rook. If the rook were to move, then white takes back on b2, and all of a sudden there's mating threats against this h8 square. Maybe not mate immediately, but just incredibly strong threat, which is nearly impossible to stop. Black has no way to stop the queen from infiltrating along this diagonal. So I think you're right that Hammer probably does have to capture on d5. Though it is a question, does he capture with the pawn or the rook? If rook take d5 or pawn take d5, black will be left in a scenario where this light square diagonal will be opening up, and this rook on f7 is just a problem piece. You could very well imagine a scenario like this one where white is just crashing through, this queen on a6 completely out of play, white having all the fun. We could see Hammer go down pretty hard in this game.
Yes, we could. No doubt about it. Yeah, let's keep an eye on that. But in the interim, Ashwin Jayram and Chris Yu, let's check back in on those two in Group B. Chris Yu, the lone FIDE master now in this field. He has he can earn an international master norm with 4 points, and that would be his final norm, I believe. So he would
final norm. He has a rating, so he's
right.
He's like one good tournament performance away from getting the IM title.
Indeed.
And it seems like he's going all out against Jayram in this position. All of the black pieces focused on attacking on the king side. Now, sometimes the problem, when you're attacking on the king side, but your own king is also on the king side, you could leave yourself a bit overextended. And I think that's perhaps what we're seeing in this position, black's king not having the best shelter on h8. Now, black would love to someday perhaps remove the knight from f6 and unleash this rook battery all along the f-file. The problem is that black has to be constantly concerned about this potential weakness on h6. Now it is.
All right, we do have
move.
Brandon Jacobson ready to come into the studio,
Okay.
so we're going to prep him, and let's keep looking at this game right now.
All right, well, sounds good. I was imagining that black might want to play a move like knight g4, simply to bring the knight into the attack even further, defend the h-pawn, unleash the rooks. Now it is Ashwin's move in this position. The question is what to do. His pieces don't seem that well coordinated, especially this rook on a1, the knight on f1, the queen on c6. There doesn't seem to be that great coordination. Though I do like the setup or the configuration of this bishop and the rook kind of staring down at this knight. But Ashwin has a lot of time here. 12 minutes, just over 12 minutes to 1 minute and 33 seconds for the youngster. They are on move 32. There are 8 more moves to play until time control. I'm sure Ashwin will be trying to navigate his way through the chaos in this position and attempting to just hold on for dear life, given that black's attack is looking very scary. I'm also imagining threats of queen e2, perhaps just infiltrating with the queen. Maybe a move to consider here for white is to play rook a2. This rook would really like to enter back into the game, maybe not back into the game, but just enter the game from being very out of play on a1. And if the rook can swing over to f2, then there can be so much pressure against this knight on f6. So it's possible we'll see a situation where both players are trying to attack on the king side, and these situations are always exciting for us viewers and us commentators to watch. Now, we'll keep an eye on this game, but I do want to welcome a special guest in the studio, Brandon Jacobson. Congratulations after winning your game today in pretty stellar fashion.
Thank you.
So I would like to get your thoughts on the game and also your thoughts on the tournament, given that you're one of the youngest players in the field, second youngest to Christopher Yu. You're in high school?
Yeah.
And do you have to kind of balance schoolwork while playing this event?
Well, I'm actually taking a few college classes.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
I have time to balance chess and schoolwork.
okay. It's very nice.
I need to discipline myself.
Gotcha. I've been there before as a college student, where trying to balance college classes and chess. And sometimes the college classes are easier to balance because you have a bit more flexibility. So let's go through the game. Now, I also want to mention you recently got your IM title.
Yeah, I did.
Congratulations on that. Do you have any Grandmaster norms?
No, I don't.
So is the potential Grandmaster norm in this event on your mind, or are you just trying to think about
Well,
one
I'm
game
trying
at a
not
time?
to think about it, but it's kind of hard in a tournament like this. So I'm
That's
just trying
very
to
true.
play the best I can and
Well,
see
I-
if it comes.
I won't make any attempts to try and make you think about it further. But let's go back and see the game. Now, you took down pretty formidable player, Danish Boros, with the black pieces. Were you expecting an English opening in this
Yeah,
game?
he's been playing that a lot recently,
Mhm.
so I looked at it.
And how much of the opening was
Up to
pre-game
when he
preparation?
played Bishop D2.
Bishop D2?
Last night I had a
Okay.
brief look at Bishop G5 instead.
Yeah, I play very similar lines as white, and usually I like to put the bishop on
And then,
D5 or G5 and then combine that with knight
yeah,
D5.
so then black would take on C3 and then go H6.
Take on C3 and then play H6.
And then take, knight D2. So it's pretty equalish. Yeah, just look at this.
Yeah, it seems like a very
Bishop
typical
D7.
English position.
Mhm.
But I mean, if you can equalize from this line, then I'm sure you'd be fine with that. So Bishop D2, yeah, seems a little bit more passive, but maybe trying to avoid these potential double pawns on the queen side. I do like the move that you played here, A5.
Yeah, just logical move.
Just,
A3, Bishop C5. There's no B4 now.
Right. So if he plays A3, you would play
Bishop
C5. Makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
So in the game, he played H3. And at what point did you feel like the momentum was starting to go in your
Well,
favor?
yeah, around here, I think E4 is a little too ambitious, giving up to D4 square, because I think his attack is too slow. I was considering knight D7 here, but that seems a little artificial. Like, the idea of knight C5 and F5 and giving up the bishop.
I see.
But then I was afraid white might eventually get in D4, and if white can get the bishop on B4 and play D4, it should be slightly better for white. So something like A3.
So A3,
Bishop takes.
Bishop take.
Now I want to go A4 here, but then I think white goes D4. No, white has slight advantage.
Mm-hmm.
So if knight C5 instead, then I think B3. And now if I try F5, for example, I'm pretty sure white can just take on F5 and then go D4.
I feel like this is a risk with conceding the
Yeah.
bishop pair so early. Is if white can manage to open up the position, the bishops can just be more
So I
dominant.
think Bishop C5 seemed more principled, just trying to go knight D4.
Yeah, it seemed like a very logical decision. Given that, yeah, E4 looks a little bit ugly, where it blocks the bishop and just permanently weakens the D4 square. Now going forward, I really liked what you did coming up here after this move.
Yeah, I think I'm already better here, because it's not
Right.
easy for white to do anything active.
And like you kind of built up just a very solid position, then you had this very nice expanding move, pawn d5.
Yeah, I could go bishop c7 if I want to play it safer, but then it's not clear how I'm better if something like bishop g2, d5, maybe even c5 here. It's sort of like a reverse Roy Lopez, but...
That's true. Seems like a slightly slower game.
Yeah.
I feel like d5 was very timely, though, given that white's pieces were a bit out of play, especially this bishop on f3 and the pawn on h3 being targets in many of the tactical variations. After pawn d5, the trade happened, and yeah, it seemed like white didn't have too many options here.
Probably he shouldn't take the pawn, but it's already difficult, like bishop g2 maybe. But I can do something like take c4, take e4, and then bishop c4.
Seems like black is having a lot of fun. Again, with this pawn on e4 and bishop on g2, it's slightly sad for white. So yeah, it seemed like the position just
for a long time
was
I
getting
wanted
more
to
and
play
more
d
fun.
takes e4. From when I went d5, I was calculating d takes e4 here after bishop takes e5.
Oh, d take e4.
The idea is if he takes back, d takes e4, queen takes d1, and whichever way he takes back, I play bishop b3 or bishop a2. So here I have bishop a2.
And potentially winning the exchange.
But if rook b takes d1 instead of rook f takes, bishop b3, bishop takes f6, bishop takes d1, takes, he can try for some compensation, rook takes d1, takes king g2. But black should be better here, but they're still tricky, like the knight can go to c3 and d5. So it's a little bit unclear, but black should be better.
Yeah, it looks preferable for black, but especially with this knight coming to d5 and also opposite color bishops, maybe you wouldn't have most winning chances.
But the reason I didn't go into this was after you could go back instead of d takes e4, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6.
So after
d takes e4.
D take e4, bishop take
takes
f6.
Yeah. Queen takes, bishop takes e4, and then rook a2 here. It looks nice for black, but there's no clear threat. So something just like rook c1. Because my idea is instead of rook c1, if he plays like rook a1, then I think I can go bishop b3 here. So if he takes, the rook is hanging. And to defend the knight, you have to go queen e2. Queen e1, sorry.
Queen e1.
And then bishop takes f2 here.
Wow.
So the a1 rook is hanging. So rook takes a2. Bishop takes e1. Rook takes f6. And then bishop takes a2. And then this should be much
Seems
better
like
for
such
black.
a mess, but
yeah, at the end it should be better for black. But the main problem was after rook a2. I'm not really threatening anything, but it looks dangerous. So I should have initiative here too, but I think what I did was more clear.
Yeah, this is a tricky position to evaluate because white does have the extra pawn, and if you don't have anything immediate, then maybe white's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like what you did in the game. Bishop take h3 seemed just a lot more direct, and we actually didn't get to see the finale of this game in the broadcast because you finished so quickly.
Yeah.
So
because I was already getting pretty low on time here. So.
Right. I did want to ask about this moment though, because we saw around rook take e4. Was this a more intuitive sacrifice?
Yeah,
or?
it was intuitive.
Okay.
I barely calculated any lines. I just felt like I had to play that because all white's pieces are bad here. And not really risking much because at best for white, you're going to give up the d4 pawn to trade queens, and even that is probably around equal. So it didn't seem like there was much risk.
Yeah, it seemed like, okay, your attack was coming pretty strong. Very nice move, pawn e3. At what point did you feel like the game was just completely winning? Already here?
I think already after rook takes e4, it seemed completely winning because it's not easy to defend with white.
Well, let's see how the game finished, given that...
I'm not sure if queen e6 is the most accurate, but I was already low on time, so I just went for the most simple line.
Now, we weren't looking at the time situation. Was he also low on time, or he was
He had
moving
about 30
quicker?
minutes.
Oh, wow. So
yeah.
sometimes it's nerve-wracking having the better position, but having the time deficit.
Yeah.
You want to be careful not to slip up. But it seemed like a very smooth position to play. Just moves came in pretty naturally. Win the e3 pawn. And yeah, queen a2, nice move. Lying h2. And wow, knight e5. Yeah, beautiful finish given this fork, given that the queen is tied down to both rooks and your bishop plays a role by pinning the pawn. So what are your thoughts going forward in the tournament? Are you just taking it one game at a time? Do you prepare for each opponent beforehand?
I'm doing it mostly like the night before or the morning of. I just looked at their games briefly before the tournament, but most of the preparation is right before the game.
Gotcha. And do you know who you're playing tomorrow?
I think I have White against Holt, right? Yeah.
Against Holt, okay. And now you're not only going for a potential Norm, but you're also fighting for the lead in your group. What is it like being kind of an underdog going into the event? I mean, you're one of 2 non-GMs who are playing in the event. Are you, do you feel perhaps a lack of confidence going into the event, or do you feel like you're able to maintain your confidence in your form against these strong players?
I feel like I wasn't really thinking too much about confidence. It just, in my last few tournaments, I've gone down like 60 points, all because of time trouble, so I've been trying to fix that problem this tournament.
Okay, well, I won't keep you any longer. Best of luck in your next games, and we are going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back with more coverage from the 2018 Fall Chess Classic.
Question on Twitter from Damas. I should not have pronounced that. That was a bit of a trap, yeah?
For those of you who are new to chess, it might look like ba3 is an illegal move here because white advances pawn 2 squares, not 1. But it's a little something we call en passant. And you can do that, but you have to do it instantly. You can't wait for a move, like let's say play king e7, king g2, and now try, because could I do it?
I'm sorry. This is too funny for words.
This is a software glitch? I'm pretty sure there's not a lot.
Lawrence. Hello, Lawrence. Yeah, I'll play 4 against Lawrence. And now he's going to play something against me which we discussed at length during the course of my stay. Yeah, he told me this is excellent. d5, this was what I was kind of hoping for, because now I think e5 is quite strong. No, Lawrence, this is not how chess works. Sadly, it would be much, much more fun if chess actually worked like this. But I don't think it does. Or maybe it does. Well, that's me regretting what I just said. How did I get from there to here is a little bit beyond me. And what's worse, I will never hear the end of it. My quality of life has just gone downhill tremendously because I'm actually sharing the office with the guy.
When you visit St. Louis, you'll probably want to watch the Cardinals or the Blues. But what about after the game? Heading back to the hotel would be a major error. Instead, boogie through the city and discover the music that gave the blues their name at the National Blues Museum, Broadway Oyster Bar, or even the legendary Blueberry Hill. So whether you love the Cardinals, the Blues, or the blues, come play with us. Hey, you guys know I can't play this, right? St. Lou is always exploring.
And hello, welcome back to Round 5 coverage of the 2018 Fall Chess Classic. Ben Simon with International Master Eric Rosen. Brandon Jacobson was just in the studio, and he says, look, I can't help it. I can't stop thinking about the norm opportunities here, you know? And so many players that you hear from, they say, I'm just going to take it one game at a time. But I like that answer from Brandon.
I did too, yeah. I mean, you have to... at this level, you have to have some mental discipline. You can't worry about the external factors, whether it be norms, prize money, fame and glory affecting your play. You just have to focus on playing good moves.
While we were away, Ray Robson has defeated Sethuraman in Group A, and with just a royal pin, I guess you could call it there at the end, huh?
Royal pin, the bishop pinning the queen to the king. Beautiful.
Well, let's
finish.
see if we can get that position up on the board here. There we go.
There we go. Very impressive play by Ray. I know he was a bit low on time, but we saw this move, knife f5 earlier, and this final position, bishop to d4, taking advantage of the fact that this rook on d8 is overworked. It's defending the f8 square, and if it takes on d4, there would be queen f8 mate. Otherwise, black is just losing a queen. It would be great if we could get Ray in the studio to talk about, is this his first win in the tournament? I think it is.
I think it might be. This brings him back up to an even score. Yes, he had 3 draws and a loss to Kuzubov. Actually, third round against Lenderman. He came down here for an interview, both players did, and they were like actually really excited to talk with us, but the show had already gone off the air. So, yeah, we should really talk to Ray if possible, because I know he has a lot he wants to share.
Just have to make sure the studio door isn't locked. You can't be knocking and trying to get in.
Right. So, yeah, we'll work on that. So there's only one game left in Group A. Daro versus Eric Hanson is still in progress, but all the other games have finished. Kuzubov has defeated Hammer.
Right, we were expecting that game for the hammer to get hammered, and in this case, pretty tough finish as White's pieces did crash through. I actually really like the finish. The queen and rook playing a very brutal role against attacking the black king. And you may think that White just won the queen and won the game, but the game ended without White actually capturing the black queen after bishop f6. Very nice move rather than taking on d6. Queen h8 check, taking advantage of the pinned bishop on f6 and getting ready to take the bishop with the queen on f6, and then White is just cruising to victory.
Is there a mate coming here, or just...
Yes, I mean, queen take f6, king to h7. Anytime White could just take the queen and be winning. We could have some fun and try and keep checking around, and maybe... Oh, rook e8 doesn't quite lead to anything. Mate would be inevitable, though, after rook take d6. So.
Wow, that tournament hall has emptied out in a hurry. Look at that wide shot right there.
Yeah, lots of empty boards.
That's the only game right there. You see Daro Spirits and Eric Hanson. That's the only one still in progress.
In Group A.
In Group A, yes, in Group A.
And that's going to be a long fight. The position we saw earlier with Eric just turtling up on the king side, he's managed to trade off the pair of knights, and now it's a bit easier to breathe. But this rook on h7 still very much out of play, and White is still having most of the fun, but it is a question how to break through. And I'm wondering in this position, they're on move 39 after queen to c7 just played. I'm wondering if Daro is considering a potential bishop sacrifice. Bishop take g6 looks very enticing, sacking the bishop for 2 pawns, but opening up the g-file for this rook battery. But I'm not sure if it's something to go for when you have 30 seconds left to calculate. He did not play... What did he play? Looks like he played some move. He played queen d4, much more controlled move. This gives him an additional half hour on the clock. And now Hanson is left thinking here. He has one more move to play until he reaches move 40 and he has less than a minute to play his next move. So we should stay on this moment until he makes his next move. Not sure if we can determine what the time is. The DGT digital board says just over 40 seconds. Not a lot of time. See the Red Bull by his side. Sure, he might need that energy boost going into the next phase of this game, where he will hopefully get the extra half hour. Okay, just about 20 seconds left.
Okay.
And he plays king to e8.
We can take a closer look at this game while we wait for Daro's next move. Really your choice, but we do have Robson outside the studio ready for an interview, so we'll get him set up.
Okay,
here.
well, sounds good. Yeah, we could, let's go around the games here and see what is going on. Maybe we can go back to this game between El-Shawn Moradiabadi and Akshat Chandra. They have a very interesting endgame where black is up the exchange, but white has 3 pawns for it. 4 pawns against 1 pawn if you just count the pawns. This seems like a very nice situation for white to be in. A lot of time for both players. Last move that was played, white actually snagged a pawn with rook to g6 check, rook take g5. It's going to be tough for black to hold on here, given that these kingside pawns on g2 and h3 are passed pawns. White is going to have a lot of time to potentially regroup and keep things defended and perhaps slowly make progress. Trying to predict what black will do here. If black ever tries to get counterplay with a move like, let's say, rook e2, white can very easily defend, perhaps even knight e5, and if king f6, there would be knight f3, just holding on, making sure that g2 is constantly defended, and if rook f2, there's always rook g3. And as long as white can keep everything held together, then eventually white can start making progress. So my money is on El-Shawn here to eventually win the game, but we could see a very long fight in this one. Now I do want to go back to the game that has just completed and welcome Grandmaster Ray Robson in the studio. Ray, I do have to compliment you on your jacket, having had it from the Olympiad in Batumi. I first want to ask, how have you been recovering from coming back overseas?
Not amazingly well. I feel relatively okay. It's just that obviously I was tired after the event, and then even though I didn't play that much, but I was still preparing and stuff. And I don't know, I just haven't been able to sleep as much as I want to, so that's the one thing which I wish I could do better, but just hasn't been happening.
Do you feel like the start was kind of slow due to the kind of the nature that, okay, you have to come over jet lag and you have to and just play an event after arriving, and then do you feel maybe some momentum after this game?
I guess there's always momentum after you win, but no, I didn't feel like, I wasn't expecting to start very fast. The only thing that was annoying was obviously that I lost with white, and I was too, I wanted to win that game probably too much, and I just took a really bad decision. But that was my only white game before this game, and all my other 3 games were with black, and all the players here are very, very strong, and I didn't have any chances really to win any of those games. So I didn't really expect to have like lots of chances either. So obviously I'm trying to press with my white game, so I tried to push for this game. I played the English opening, which
I wanted to ask about, because you're notorious for playing e4 on move 1. When was the last time you played the English opening, if ever?
I don't know that I've ever played c4 on move 1. I've played d4, and I played knight f3 and transposed to English a few times, but I don't think I ever started with c4, because obviously black can play e5, which he did, and
it's true.
It's not like I have a lot of analysis on the English. I just decided to play it like last night. Like just last night. Wow. I just thought it would be a good choice. But the thing is, he plays almost every line against it, so I had a lot to look at, and so obviously I couldn't prepare super deeply on every single line.
Well, it's nice to catch him maybe a little bit off guard. I'm sure he was preparing maybe more E4 lines.
For sure.
Do you think now I know you play Sicilian as black, does being a Sicilian player help with playing the English?
There could be some reverse Sicilians. Honestly, I'm really terrible at the reverse positions. Like, I don't even recognize that when positions are reverse colors that they are a reverse position. And I feel like with the Sicilian, it's more dynamic. I mean, the English is surprisingly dynamic in these lines, but it's still more positional, I feel like. So it does have a different feel to it.
Well, take us through the game, because it seemed like somewhat of a quiet opening, and then at some point the fireworks just started.
So I knew this was a line. I think G3 is a move, or at least that's the plan. Play bishop G2 and knight H4. Black's trying to play F5. That's what he was trying to do. That's why I played knight H4. Because if I had played bishop G2 immediately, I thought maybe he could play maybe knight B6 first, and then let's say D3, then F5. So I just wanted to play knight H4 first to make sure he couldn't get in F5 too quickly.
And of course, later ideas of playing knight F5, which you actually did
sometimes.
play.
And then A6 was the first really interesting moment, and I wasn't sure what to think about it. I mean, when he first played, I didn't think it was a good move, but I still feel like it shouldn't be that good, but I wasn't able to find a real refutation. So the two moves I thought about were castle or D3. Yeah, castle makes the most sense probably, but then after B5, here I was thinking a lot about D4. Take, and by the way, I didn't take on B5 first and then D4 because in some lines he'd have rook A4 protecting his knight on D4. So here something like I can play queen B2 or queen D2. Let's say queen D2 looks most natural, and here I think he has to play knight C6. If he plays something like one of the knights to E6, then I play F4, F5 very quickly, and then F6. So knight C6, and I have E5 if I want, and then he just plays bishop B7, and somehow here, yeah, it looked very tempting at first, but then I didn't feel like there was really anything, and now his knight isn't pinned anymore. He can take on E5 next move because his C5 knight protects the bishop, so I'll have to take, and then I think he should be fine. So I really wanted to play D4, but then I just couldn't make it work. So instead I took on B5 and played rook D1, so I'm still trying to play D4. And then I was anticipating this annoying rook A4 move, because otherwise he can't really stop D4 effectively. And now I'd really like to play bishop B2 to again play D4, but then B4 I think is working. D4, B takes C3, D C5, C B2, and his rook on A4 is hanging, but my rook on A1 is hanging, and so he should be fine. So unfortunately I didn't find anything better than playing D3, which was a lot slower than I wanted it to be, but I just didn't see what other move I had. So he played bishop E6, bishop E3. This all looks critical. Queen A8. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, D4 was coming. So he has this queen A8 move, which prepares. Well, it pins the A pawn. So he has ideas of knight B3 or bishop E3 now, and he's just attacking the pawn. So D4 looks. For us, this all kind of looked critical, and then actually was surprised by knight b3. I was looking at ED4 mostly, but maybe it was the best move. But if ED4, CD4, and now one line, for instance, is knight b3, and I was thinking probably I can just play d5 here, knight a1, rook a1. I'm forking him, but he has knight b4. But now I take c7, and the next move, well, actually his bishop isn't in a great spot. At bishop g4, I might play h3 first. And yeah, I'm taking d6, and well, it's tricky. Let's say bishop g4. Let's just go rook c8, queen d6, knight c2. He could try something like that, but I thought if I just take g4 and knight takes, and I don't know, probably just knight f5 or something, my pieces look so
did you actually calculate this line during the game? Oh wow. So I know you like to spend your time calculating.
No, the thing is, I
very
spent.
deep variations.
Oh, the problem was I spent way too much time after he played a6, the next like 2 moves, because I was calculating a lot of stuff and wasn't sure, and I didn't find anything that clearly gave me advantage, which I felt like should be there. So that was really enough.
After a6 on move.
Yeah, the a6 move.
Do you remember how long you spent at this moment?
I spent a really long time, and then also after b5, I thought again because I wanted to play d4, but then I realized that it wasn't really working as far as I could see. So then after I played d4 and move 16, knight b3, yeah. So his idea is just I'm going to be able to play d5, and he's going to take a1, or he's going to get one of my rooks, and I'll get 2 pieces.
Which actually seemed pleasant for white.
Yeah, I don't know. After knight b3, I also could have played d5 immediately. Instead of a takes b3. I could play d5 here, knight a1, rook a1, and here I keep the pair of rooks, which I think I want to have on the board, I think. But my pawn structure is worse because now my a2 pawn is isolated, and in the game it got to b3, so something like bishop d7, dc6, bishop c6, I guess f3. And I wasn't sure, but maybe it was better than what happened, because in the game, maybe I was worse, I'm not sure. Yeah, take d5.
That still seemed very complex.
Yeah, he could have thrown in bishop g4 to force me to play f3 instead of bishop d7. But I also protect the e4 pawn. So he wanted to play bishop d7 and take c6, so that's why he did it this way, and then I actually played f3 myself. So I just didn't find anything better. He's starting to take d1 and e4. And here I had very little time, and I had to make 20 more moves, and his position might also be better. He has, I mean, normally 2 pieces for the rook and pawn is really good, but he has a great structure here, and once you get into endgames, it's not so clear with the 2 pieces versus the rook.
That's very true. It seemed like the position opened up a lot after d5.
Yeah, well, I was happy that it opened up, because then my pieces got. I didn't think d5 was actually a good move. Then he weakened his whole pawn structure, and also like my bishop got to c5. So.
Do you think the fact that you were low on time maybe provoked him to be overambitious and play a bit riskier?
I think that happens sometimes. Yeah, maybe somewhat, and maybe he wanted to play d5 because it makes the game more sharp. It looks like it makes the game more sharp, and obviously I had little time. But I also think he just thought he was better.
I see.
So he was probably going to try to win regardless.
Now I want to get to this moment where you play this very surprising move, knight f5, which caught us off guard in the studio, given that it's not the type of move that you would normally consider. Was this a move that you saw from afar, or do you think he was expecting it too, or?
Oh, I don't think he was expecting knight f5 here. I would have liked to play, like I saw the thing is he has such weak dark squares now since he played g6, which maybe, I don't know if g6 was the best, because yeah, now he has all these weak squares. And I would like to play queen d2 instead of knight f5, and then if take, let's say, knight f5 now, but it's too slow with because he has bishop c4. So the idea of knight f5 is that if he takes on f5, then I play queen d2 now, and then I attack the bishop, and then I'm also going to g5, where I at least have a perpetual, and probably if he just takes f3, I don't think I have more, because let's say check and king h8. Let's say if I tried bishop e7 or something, then he always has queen a7, and then I get mated.
Oh wow, it's a do or die move.
Yeah. So I could check on f6 instead and take f5, but it's probably still just probably a draw. Oh yeah, I don't know. Should be a draw.
Take on f6.
Yeah,
take
check
on
and take f5, and then queen c3. And now, yeah, I think it's just a draw because I still don't have bishop to e7.
You would really love to play this, but you can't concede this diagonal.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, he was still trying to win, but he was also getting lower on time, and like for the first time after he took on f3 and I played queen d2, like I felt like I'm actually can actually try to win, or could actually win the game, because I didn't. I mean, he could take f5 still. It transposes to the previous line, but it didn't feel like he was about to take f5. It felt like he was still maybe trying to win, or didn't sense how much danger there was.
Right. I mean, if I were playing this position as black, I might easily see like queen g5, king h8, and then not see queen a7 after bishop e7, given that so much focus is on the king side. You forget about these long distance moves with the queen. So yeah, maybe he
played queen a6. So he's just bringing the queen back to the defense. But the problem is now I have queen h6, and he can't take f5 because there's this funny pin. So he has to play queen f6. And at first, when I was thinking after queen d2, when it was his turn, like at first I thought that this would be fine for him, that probably I shouldn't provoke his queen to f6. But then I realized that if I just protect the knight, so I played bishop d3, now he still can't take because he's still pinned. And I'm threatening bishop e7, which would force queen h8, which has to be losing.
That looks like a dream come true for white.
He'd love to play e4, but the problem is he just never can because I have bishop d4 and then mate on g7.
Wow.
So
black's just stuck here.
So I'm just threatening bishop e7, and he's just stuck. So at first, like, the main thing I thought about here was rook a8, because he still does have these queen check ideas if I move the bishop from c5. So here if bishop e7, he'd have queen b6 check. Then if king f1, rook a1 is mating me. So after rook a8, the other thing is his rook is also stuck, because if it leaves the back rank, I have queen f8 mate. So he really can't move anything. So here I was planning to just play h3, because I was thinking about something like king f2, but he'd have bishop g4 probably. So just, I don't know, h3 just seemed like a useful move, and I didn't see what he could do here. I mean, he could still, I don't know what I'm threatening, maybe king f2, but I just didn't see what move he was making. So I thought it's very,
I mean, at
very
least
dangerous.
you got a position where you can maybe play 10 more moves and make move 40.
Also, I mean, it looks very hard for him to defend, because he also didn't have time. Objectively, it might even just be like very bad.
Is there some plan, maybe like g4, g5? Even?
Well, I was saying maybe king f2 next move. So also, like, where can he go? It's almost zugzwang, right? Neutral zugzwang.
Actually, that's true. Yeah.
Oh, let's say can he play
like
king h8? No, he wants to keep the rook on the a file. Maybe he can play king h8. And then king f2. Bishop somewhere. And now he's still pinned. Can I just play g4? Yeah. Then I'm threatening g5 now.
Wow. And his king is controlling. Or
maybe I should have even
h8.
played after king h8, maybe even g4 immediately, and then g5 is the idea. Maybe that's the main idea of h3.
And the king has to go back to g8.
Then g5, queen h8, knight e7.
That would be a nice finish. Just seemed like a just very aesthetic attack, starting with knight f5, where once you get to the situation where the queen is pinning the pawns, seems like things are just going in your favor.
Yeah, so he played rook e8, and now I thought I could just take the pawn and basically just go back at least, because again he's still stuck and he can't take again because queen f8. And the one thing is, it does look like he might have e4 here, because if bishop d4, his rook takes d4 now, because his rook is on the d file. But I had noticed this trick, and well, obviously I was hoping he'd fall for it, but yeah, and he actually did, because I have this knight e7 first, and then fortunately bishop d4 works because I have the mate on f8.
Yeah, beautiful finish. This is, I think, one of the nicer attacking games so far this tournament. There have been a lot of games ending in like these solid draws or endgame grinds, but we haven't seen too many like devastating attacking games like this so far. So that puts you back at an even score. What are your thoughts going forward with the rest of the games? Are you just going to take it one game at a time, or?
Yeah. Well, I didn't really look at the pairings like ahead of time, so.
Do you know who you're playing?
I don't know who I'm playing. The only thing I knew before the tournament started, before I checked the pairings, was that I was playing Alex Lenderman in round 3 with black, because he was also in part of the U.S. team in Batumi.
You guys worked together,
yeah,
right?
So he told me that we were playing in round 3. But yeah, it's going to be tough. Like, I only have 2 more white games, and I think I'm playing, I mean, everyone's strong, but I think I'm playing really solid people. I forget who, but, and yeah, I don't think, like, I'm playing amazingly well. So, you know, I just want to be solid and try to have as much energy so that I can try to play a little faster, because, like, I really had to make so many moves today with low time, and somehow, like, I was able to, but it easily could have gone badly for me.
Yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of discipline. Well, I won't keep you any longer. Best of luck in your next rounds, and get some rest.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we are going to take a look back at the games. I believe there's been a few results. I want to go back to the El-Shawn Diabadi against Akshat Chandra game, because El-Shawn has finally got his pawn rolling on the king side. Pawn is now on h5, within range of queening, and black is struggling to come up with any sort of counterplay. We can see time situation for Akshat. They're well past move 40, and okay, Akshat has just over 5 minutes to make the rest of his moves. We should keep in mind the 30-second increment is in effect, but okay, not a great situation for black to be in. I do want to welcome back to the studio Ben Simon. Good to have you back. Do you have any updates? Any more results that have happened?
Well, we have 3 games total still happening, and we do know that in Group B, Gabuzian is on his way cruising to yet another victory.
Wow.
And so this will keep him. We saw Jacobson win today, so he's still just going to be 1 point ahead of the pack, but this guy is unstoppable. And in this round against Conrad Holt with the black pieces, it looks like it's really breaking down here. What's your assessment of the situation?
I mean, this is shocking, given that I dismissed this as a draw at the beginning of the broadcast, thinking that, okay, Conrad was up a pawn. I want to go back to that moment where I thought it was just going to end in a draw very shortly. Because I was thinking that white might be the one trying to win, having the extra pawn. But yeah, in hindsight, I'm realizing that if black can win back 1 pawn, given that all of white's pawns are weak, then black will naturally have better structure. And it seems like that's exactly what happened. There have been so many moves that have been played in this endgame. Black did go up a pawn with knight take f4, and then black proceeded to win the pawn eventually on d4. And then it was just a 3-on-2 endgame. Lots of dancing around here. White took on f4, but looks like there was no defense to this h-pawn. And then, okay, actually curious around this moment why this move, knight take h4, wasn't played, but now I'm realizing knight take e6. So Gabuzian clearly trying to keep all the tension in the position. If knight take e6 here, why was that not played? Rook c7. Oh, okay, the rook was attacked, so there's no time for knight take e6 due to king f6, given that both pieces would be attacked. Let's zoom forward to the current position, because this is just a 2-on-1 battle with rooks and knights still on the board. And Gabuzian has these 2 connected pass pawns pretty well placed in the center. Now it's a question if he can convert the advantage. I really like his time situation. Still over an hour on the clock, which is very surprising given that we're over 4 hours into the first round.
Yeah, it is unusual. Okay, so we've covered the 2 remaining games in Group B. In Group A, we still have Daro versus Eric Hanson. We are approaching the end of our time with all of you, though. So we want to remind you to join us for the rest of the rounds every day at 3:30 p.m. Central Time. We're starting earlier on the last day, which is Thursday. And you can watch the games at uschesschamps.com. And you can watch them beginning at 1 p.m. Central Time every day. We'll just come on 2.5 hours after the start of the program. So this show was produced by the world's greatest production B-team. Tammy Hyde is the streamer. Isaac Schrantz is our graphics and audio man. And our technical director is Danny Machuca. My name is Ben Simon.
I'm Eric Rosen.
And we will see you tomorrow. Until then, so long from the Show Me State. This has been a presentation of the St. Louis Chess Club.